Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to discuss completing the fluid levels or the fluid level check lab for Know Your Car. This is just a basic routine maintenance lab that you can do at home. It's part of the routine maintenance lab, routine maintenance unit in class here. Now, normally when we were in the shop, we'd end up doing this alongside with an oil change. But since we don't all have that capability to be able to get under our car to complete an oil change at home, we're going to forego that for the time being. If we get to it, we'll do it. But at least today I want to show you how to check your fluids. Now, checking your fluids on your vehicle is pretty critical because there's a lot of them. You know, today we're going to talk through checking your oil level. We're going to talk through checking your transmission fluid level, clutch fluid, if you have a manual vehicle. Your brake fluid, engine coolant. I think that's all of them that we're going to discuss. There's a lot of fluids that we need to worry about in our vehicles, and in our owner's manual, each one has a specific service interval. Okay, so after a certain amount of time or mileage, those fluids wear out and need to be replaced. So today we're going to show you how to check those, discuss through some basics with each one, and away we go. So the very first thing you're going to want to do, obviously, is park your car and lift up the hood or pop the hood. I've got my computer in here. All that's doing, it's just open up to the lab page. I simply have that to keep myself straight and make sure I'm hitting everything. I'd encourage you to do the same. Either write what you need to check on paper, or even have a device or computer open with you in the engine. Now, my engine is not hot, and so we will need to keep that in mind, because for some of these fluids, they neither need to be checked hot or cold, or depending on how we check them, we might need to read them a little bit differently, okay? So the first fluid we're going to check is our engine oil. Now, engine oil is really the lifeblood of this car. Without oil, our car, or our motor specifically, will seize up. It will cease to run. Oil is really our lubricant in our engine. Lots of different types of oil. There is an SAE, the SAE organization puts out different classification. This vehicle, according to Ford, takes 5 quarts of 5W30 oil. We're going to talk a little bit more about those later when we discuss oil changes, but I at least want to make you aware of it. So on your vehicle, there will be 2 different spots for oil. There will be a fill cap, okay, and there will be a dipstick, okay, right here. Now, typically, you are going to want to check your oil warm, your car warm. So what that means is let it run for 5 minutes or so. As you get to know your car better, you're going to understand where that oil level sits. I know that when this is cold, it's going to sit a little low, and so I can treat that as such. Okay, so to check the oil, you're going to need a few things. You're going to need some paper towels or shop rags. To do that, to check the oil, you're simply going to lift out the dipstick. Okay, you're going to get a little bit oily here. Now, just for demonstration's sake, I'm going to set my dipstick out on my paper towel. If I were doing this just myself, I would just check it in the light. And here's where a light source really comes in handy, because you're going to look at the end of that dipstick, okay, and you should be able to see an oil level there. Now, the first thing you got to do is, realistically, you got to wipe the end of that dipstick off. Okay, we're going to wipe off all the oil, okay, and you can see we've got that cross-hatched area. That cross-hatched area is really our good oil level. Okay, let's hold it under a little bit of a light here. You can see it a little better. Let's see if I can focus for you. There we be. Okay, so below that dipstick is low. Anything within that cross-hatched is full. So you noticed I wiped it off. That's because it could have gotten sloshed around from moving it. Could be low from just sitting. Who knows what. But we're going to reinsert that dipstick. Okay, mine goes in just a little bit hard for whatever reason. It's an old vehicle, and it does leak a little bit of oil from our valve cover in there. That's a known issue, not too worried about it. And we're gonna pull this dipstick back out and check that oil level. You can see it's within the cross-hatched area, okay? Now, from practice, I know that it's maybe Actually, this is reading okay. When it gets warmed up, it might read a little high, but I'm not too concerned about that on this vehicle. Okay, you can wipe that off. I'm gonna just put it back in there because I'm recording with one hand and holding the dipstick with the other hand. So we'll shove it back in there and call it good. So on the lab, you're basically going to say whether the oil is full or it's low. If it's low, what you're gonna wanna do is consult your owner's manual, figure out what weight of oil, what SAE classification of oil you need, add half a quart, let that settle in, run it, check the oil level again, keep adding about half a quart at a time until you get to a full level. Okay, so that's the basics on checking your oil. Next on our list is going to be checking power steering fluid. Now, all of our modern vehicles have power steering. What that means is there's a hydraulic pump in our engine compartment that will help us mechanically turn the wheels. If you want to see what it's like to turn the tires without your power steering pump, turn your car key so it's in the run position. Okay, so the car is off, but it's just in the run position. All your electronics in the interior of the car will light up, and try to turn the wheel. You'll notice it's doable, but it's really, really hard. Okay, and so by adding a hydraulic power steering pump to it, we can significantly reduce the effort it takes to turn that wheel. Okay, that being said, there's a fluid to it. Okay, there's power steering fluid, and so that fluid needs to be at the right level. Now, power steering fluid is interesting because not only is too low bad, in that there's nothing for that pump to push through, but too high is equally as bad. If the fluid is too high, if there's too much fluid, we can actually burst seals. We can end up breaking out our pump and we have a leak and our power steering does not work real good. Okay, now on my vehicle, here's the power steering pump. It's driven by the serpentine belt coming right off the crankshaft of the engine, and here is where you check it. Okay, power steering fluid. Now in this case, on my Ford here, the fill hole or the power steering fluid fill and check spots are the same. Okay, so all we need to do is rotate this cap. It does stick a little bit. Okay, pull it out. Okay, and we are going to see, again, there's a dipstick. Okay, so we got one side that's full cold, another side that's full hot. You can see how full hot side is a little bit higher than the full cold. Here, the acceptable range is a little bit higher. It's because when things warm up, they expand. Okay, since this is cold, we're gonna check the full cold. Looks to be maybe just a touch high. You can see just a little bit of splashing above that line. I am going to assume, well actually I know from practice that that is just due to when I pull it out, it sloshes around a little bit. If this is your vehicle at home, again, wipe off that dipstick, reinsert it, pull it back out, check again, just to make sure. Again, power steering fluid, you're gonna check hot, or you're gonna check the level, and you're gonna tell me whether it is low or acceptable, whether it's at a good range. Okay, there's my focus again, sorry about that. Okay, so low or normal. Now, if it is high, what I would suggest doing is, well, especially if you're unsure about any of this, take it into your local mechanic. Get an expert to look at it. We can, they will be the ones to tell you for sure if it's low or higher, right? If you know for sure it's high, you can suction a little bit of that fluid out using kind of like a turkey baster. We have a tool here at the school that's essentially the opposite of a grease gun. Instead of forcing stuff in, it pulls stuff out, kind of like a little plunger. You can do that. If it's low, again, consult your owner's manual. Figure out what kind of power steering fluid you need. Depending on the manufacturer of your vehicle, you might have a different kind of power steering fluid. Okay? Or it might be a universal power steering fluid. So, basics of checking your power steering fluid. All right, next we're going to look at brake fluid. Now, brake fluid is really critical because without brake fluid, our brakes would not work. We do a whole unit on brakes on our cars, and so we'll get into specifics of brake fluid a little bit later, but essentially what you need to know is this brake fluid is a hydraulic fluid that gets pumped by your master's brake cylinder to each of the 4 wheels. When that hydraulic fluid gets to each of the wheels, or when it's applied, it forces your calipers or your brake drums to engage, thus slowing your car down. Okay, so probably the most critical fluid is your brake fluid, because without brake fluid, you're not going to stop. You're going to cause an accident. Okay, and so to check that, most of your vehicles will have a reservoir on top of your master cylinder. Okay, we'll have our master cylinder, we'll have a reservoir, we'll have a brake booster there. Those things are connected to your brake pedal inside the cab to engage the brakes. Now again, you're going to check for leaks. You know, with any of these fluids, your first thing is really going to be to check for leaks, make sure things aren't leaking, they're dry, etc., etc. To check this brake fluid, normally, it's going to be kind of hard to see because this is an older vehicle, but on the side, there will be high or low markings on a translucent reservoir. Over time, this reservoir has lost its translucency, and so what we can do is simply open up the cap and peek inside. Okay, and we can see that fluid is all the way up to the top. It's good to go. Now, one thing, when you take this cap off, do not let anything fall in there. Okay, if you get dust or water or anything inside that brake fluid, it will cause issues. Okay, so don't do this on a windy, dusty day. Check it when you get a chance in a nice, calm area where you're not going to get dust in there. Okay. Again, for brake fluid, is it low? Is it adequate? What is your level like? If you need to add brake fluid, again, check your owner's manual. You can see on mine, okay, it tells me use only DOT3 brake fluid from a sealed container. Okay, there's DOT3, there's DOT4, I think there might even be a DOT5 now. Okay, those are just different grades of brake fluid, different types of brake fluid. Your car's manufacturer will dictate which one to use, so use the proper material. The next fluid you're going to check on your vehicle is your transmission fluid. Now, depending on your vehicle, your transmission fluid might be checked in a couple different ways. First of all, if you have an older vehicle or a vehicle that's a little bit larger, you might have a transmission fluid dipstick. Okay, on my 94 Ranger, it has a transmission fluid dipstick. Okay, this is an automatic transmission. Okay, you might also have some automatic transmissions that do not have a dipstick. A lot of newer passenger vehicle transmissions are completely sealed, meaning that you never have to check the fluid. The only reason you'd ever add transmission fluid is if you're draining it and replacing the fluid and filter, or if you notice a leak. Okay, so like on my 2011 Ford Expedition, there is no place to check the trans fluid. Okay, on this vehicle, however, we can check it. Okay, we'll pull out the dipstick. Now this one on my vehicle is just a really long one. Okay, again, you can see, okay, there's some reddish fluid. That's what it's supposed to look like. You're gonna check this fluid, make sure there's no metallic flakes that might indicate your transmission is tearing itself up, so on and so forth. Okay, there's nothing really in mine that I'm too concerned about. Okay, and we can see there is going to be another cross-hatched area on it. Okay, let's rotate it around so you can actually read it. Okay, and it will say do not add if it's in the cross-hatched area. Okay, you'll notice I also have 2 circles. On my vehicle, that's a hot and a cold. So when the vehicle is cold, the transmission fluid should be covering that bottom circle. When it is hot, it should be covering the upper circle. Okay, so just like on your oil, reinsert the dipstick after wiping it off. Okay, pull it back out. Okay, and let's check. Okay, now, I just pulled this car into the shop. I ran it for about 3 minutes, 5 minutes maybe, pulling it into the shop. You can see my trans fluid is a little bit high. Okay, this might be something I want to keep an eye on. I might let this car sit for an afternoon, recheck the trans fluid. If it's still high, I'm going to try to suction a little bit out. But we'll see here. It might just be a little bit high. So checking your trans fluid. Again, if it's low, take it into a mechanic, see how you can add some more to it or what kind you need. But mostly vehicles will tell you, or most owners' manuals will tell you what you need. Like I believe my Ford Ranger uses something called Mercon 5 ATF, automatic transmission fluid. Double check your manual before you add anything to it. Next up is checking the radiator coolant level, okay, the coolant. Now, engine coolant is pretty critical because it helps, as the name implies, it keeps the engine cool. Okay, typically what will happen is that coolant will be stored inside your radiator. Okay, your radiator is at the front of the vehicle. Usually there's a fan, either direct driven off the crankshaft or electrically driven, that will blow air across that radiator. That radiator then will cause this coolant to cool down. Okay, it's kind of like an air conditioner. It'll run the fluid over a radiator. Once that fluid is cooled down, all the heat has been sucked out of it. It's going to pump it back around the engine to help cool it off. Okay, so coolant is a really, it's kind of a nasty substance because it is poisonous, but it also tastes very sweet. Okay, don't ask me why they make the taste so sweet, because that's a big way for kids, pets, animals to get poison. Okay, so if you have a coolant leak, I would really encourage you to get it fixed unless it's so minor that it's not a concern, or that there's no concern of any animals or people sucking that fluid up. Okay, so this coolant will run through and around the engine through lines. If that coolant gets inside an engine, we have some big issues, and we need to double check that. We usually have a seal or a gasket that needs to be replaced. Okay. On my Ranger, I have two places that I can check the coolant. I have a reservoir. Okay. Now, on mine, this reservoir is not sealed. It's not pressure sealed. Okay, so I can simply open it up and look through it. I even have some lines on the outside that I can check through if I really want to. My vehicle has a known issue where the coolant runs low. There is a slight leak somewhere in the system, and so usually the reservoir is not very accurate. Okay. The other place you can check is specifically at the radiator. Now, when you're doing this, you really need to be careful because this coolant is going to be hot and it's going to be under pressure. Okay, most of the time the caps will include some sort of warning, like it's hot fluid kept under 15 psi of pressure. Never, ever, ever open your radiator when your engine is hot. Never do it. Okay, so make sure your engine is cooled down, it's room temperature, and go ahead and open your cap. Okay, I'm gonna open it up, and I can see, okay, I'm gonna look in there, and I can see that, yep, my coolant is a little low. Okay, you can see part of the cooling fins in there. We shouldn't be able to see any of those. To me, that's an indication that my coolant level is a little low. Okay, so here I know that I have a specific type of coolant. It's just the bog standard green coolant. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and add some of that when I get home. Because this leaks, I know I just have a reservoir or a bucket of it at home to add in. Okay. Some vehicles, you will only be able to check it from the tank. It may be under pressure. My 2011 Ford Expedition is that way. Actually, I can check it at the radiator yet, but the tank itself, the overflow reservoir is pressurized, and so I will add it there. I can check it there. So checking the coolant. Check it when it's cold, add it per your owner's manual recommendations if needed. Hopefully this video has been helpful in understanding exactly what fluids you should be checking under your hood. Okay, for my routine maintenance fluid level check lab in my class, this is what I have my students do. So hopefully it was helpful in understanding exactly what to do for each of these levels and each of these fluids. If you are my student and you have questions, by all means, shoot me an email or something. If you're not my student, drop a question in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. Otherwise, good luck.